Greetings, Fred in Alaska. I've been reaching out to this guy Thomas. He's the one that shared this 10-year block of insanity. Um, yeah, it involves killing of 3 of these creatures over the course of 10 years. Now, what he conveyed to me, he originally told me this back in 1997 on the factory trawler, the Arctic Storm, out in the Bering Sea. We were on a CDQ trip for yellowfin and rock sole, bottom feeders. It was a horrible job. The Bering Sea ain't no joke. We're on a 340-foot boat with multiple levels underwater, massive boat. And 1 minute you'd be going down the hallways. 1 minute you're climbing up a mountain. Next minute you're trying not to slide down the hallway. Big waves, scary shit. Now, for him, this journey began back in 1961. Him and 2 of his buddies, they saved what little money they had to make it to the Tongass National Forest. They were doing logging, Prince of Wales Island. I believe it's the northern side of that. So they arrive. It was quite a journey to get there because they didn't have much money, and they had to take, certain less than safe means to get there. But they made it. They got to the campsite and they talked to the foreman. And it had been advertising, we need loggers, we need people. Well, they didn't have any experience, but they were willing to work hard. I believe it was Haida or Tlingit. I forgot to clarify it with them. One of the southeast tribes he's from. Now, when they got there was a lot of prejudice going on. The guy said he's only hiring whites because the natives will work for a day and then get drunk, and just social ilks. But there was some prejudice, so they were denied work, and they went bust trying to get there. So they had no means of getting the hell out of there. So they retreated into the woods and started living off some salmon out of the creek, some Arctic char, Dolly Varden, stuff like that. And they had themselves a little camp. And they're plotting on offering help to other people that lived on the island as a means to make money to get the hell off the island. Well, at their particular campsite, he didn't remember the name of the little river that cut back up in there. But they were about a quarter mile from shore, so they wouldn't get hit by the breeze from the ocean and all that stuff. They were in a nice little secluded area. Well, where they were camping, there were strange thumpings in the trees going on for like a week above them. They got 200-foot, old growth there. It was a massive forest. It still is. It's just gorgeous. Google it. Tongass National Forest. It's unreal. Very similar to BC. So, as they're trying to figure out, they had no provisions, they had no flashlights, they had a couple firearms. They had what was it? One of them had a 45-70, and the other one had, I believe it was a 270. So they had the means to protect themselves and feed themselves with the black-tailed deer and whatnot. Now, they were struggling to figure out what this thumping was, because it would be moving up in the trees around them. But they couldn't couldn't see. They could hear, but what they were hearing was an imitation of a like squirrel chatter, every once in a while like owls, and then small grunts of like a black bear, but from up in the trees, not over here in the woods, from the trees. So they were spooked, and all they would do is take turns watching at night. This went on for like a week. They were very They weren't scared. They were more curious what the hell is going on here, because they, where they were, it was adjacent to a small river, which was about 50 feet from their campsite. And then across that river, where the river was at, where they were at, it was approximately about 25 feet wide. Now, on the opposite side, the trees started just shortly back. So they're basically in a canyon of trees with a river running through it, and they were tucked into the one side of some trees. And they kept trying to figure out, because it seemed like the sound would move and then all of a sudden be across the river and doing the same stuff. but they weren't hearing anything except the thumping on the trees before noises were made. He said it was a real low thump. It was almost hard to pinpoint, but he said it sounded like something jumping from tree to tree. And that boggled his mind at the time because, they had their own legend of the hairy man down there. But it was nothing he gravitated towards. He was about making money and getting away from the village and all that kind of stuff. And so as it goes on, this one night before things hit the fan, it was the night before shit went down. They were eating dinner. One of his partners had shot a small blacktail, and they were munyucking, man. They were getting down on that. Well, as he told me, as they were eating, they had it quartered and hanging on a rope between these two trees. And in the glint of the firelight, off to his right, he notices that rope kind of jiggling. So immediately they turn their attention, they get their guns, they're like, oh, a bear must be raiding our stash. It wasn't no bear. What they saw was an arm reaching from behind the tree, reaching down to grab, a huge arm, trying to grab the rope that the stuff was hanging on. And it grabbed the rope and it just, one fell swoop, ripped. And all of a sudden, there was like 3/4 on there and a brisket and something else. I think there was some loose meat pieces hanging over the rope that fell on the ground. But this thing snatched it and went up the tree, out of sight. And then they heard the thumping and moving sound through the trees and then back across the river. So they were in big what the fuck mode, That would... And he said they were too shocked to like start shooting. They were just trying to, like, what just happened? We're sitting here trying to eat, and out of the blue, this thing snatches our shit and bags it. So, they were concerned, but none of them had an overwhelming sense of fear. Not even a little bit, And so it being back in the 60s, there was a different mindset in those times. Finding work in remote Alaska, if it meant painting someone's house or something of this nature to make money, it was a lot more simple is what I'm getting at. So they had limited means. This thing just stole their shit and ran off in the trees. And so they're sitting there contemplating the next morning, it's not worth it being here. So they all went to where there was houses and stuff looking, can we split wood for you? Can we do this, that? They even went to the ferry operator at the time's house and asked him, hey, you need some boats, need patching, whatever we got to do. Let's make some money. We'll get the hell out of here. So the guy that was running one of the ferries said, okay, yeah, my dock is messed up. I have the piling, not the pilings, but I have the timbers to fix it. I just don't have the manpower right now because I'm too busy running. They said, bet, we'll take that job. He said, I'll pay you handsomely. They start work immediately. They worked on that thing all day, and they knew they had about an hour's worth of travel to get back to their camp before dark. And with what happened the night before, they were real anxious to get back to camp before dark because all their means, all their worldly goods they had at the time were at that camp. Obviously, they can't hang it in a tree because something will, so they left it as is and figured whatever that was, it just took the meat. So they get back to camp. Now, what was crazy is as they were getting closer, they started hearing movement up in these trees, just out of sight. It would be like 10 trees away, but they could hear like a scampering and a jump. Like the tree would shake, and then you'd hear the impact of the land on the next tree. Just, and they were freaked out. They were armed, of course. They came across a few black bears as they were walking, and when the black bear saw them, the black bear, instead of turning and running, just kind of hung its head, huffed a little bit, and like stepped out of their way. He said it was really weird. He'd never seen them act that way. It was almost like, oh, you're going that way? Yeah, here, let me get out of your way. Have at it, good luck. It is what he told me. I'm just envisioning that bear stepping off the trail like, go ahead. Have fun with that shit. So they go on a couple bears this way. Now, once they get back towards their camp is when it starts getting a little bit tense, because as they're coming into camp, they come around this big tree, big Douglas fir, and as they come around, something stands up from their camp, turns, this hairy man looks at them, jumps up into the tree and scrambles up it faster than they've seen anything move. And all their stuff wasn't thrown about, but it was all, anything in a pack or anything was picked out and just set out like this thing was examining what they had. They noticed that 2 of their boxes of ammo were unaccounted for. They had no money. Now they have limited rounds. So they, for the 270, I should say, Thomas had the 4570, and he kept all the loose ammo in his vest. So everywhere he walked, he had kind of a jiggle to him. You know, rounds just kind of randomly. Anyway, so they're immediately freaked out. They don't know what to make of it, because now they're being investigated basically by this thing that stole their shit. So they have some get back in mind. So one of his partners takes a 270 and goes to look for another blacktail. Now, why they were still willing to venture, especially they let their buddy go off alone, I couldn't answer that. Dude was unharmed, but he ended up getting like a real small fawn. They were surviving, basically. It's nothing I recommend. You don't want to kill babies, but when in Rome, what do? You got to eat. So he comes back with the fawn, and he guts it out in that little river to let the river just flow the intestines on down, and all the innards they weren't going to mess with, just to keep camp clean from any scavenging because of what had been going on. Now, as he's gutting it and cleaning it out down at the river, which is just right over there, not far. They had eyes on him when he was doing it. They heard this horrific scream coming from across that river up in the trees, a little distance away where they couldn't see. He said they could tell it was near, but it was far enough away that they didn't feel imminent danger, but it changed their whole view, because up until this point it was little squirrel sounds, little bear grunt noises, things of this, nothing too detrimental to what they thought would be dangerous. And so that scream changed it. It changed how they totally viewed anything about what was going on, because he said the nature of that scream was like vengeful. He said it had a vengeful, like, aggravation to it, like, I'm over this, rawr, like you're good, I'm done. Which you don't want that. You don't want no parts of that shit if that's what's going on. So they all posse up. He drags the fawn over, and he's continuing to do what he does, because they're hungry, and they got the fire going and everything. Now, down there, they don't have the same light cycles we do. They do stay lighter, during certain times of the year, like summertime up here, but it's not the same, because it's further south. And so they get darker a little faster than we do up here in like the Matsu Valley per se, or over in Bristol Bay, or up north. Now, as they're discussing their night's plans, who's going to start watch and all this, they all decide that the 270 will be a backup and the 4570 will be the primary, because they planned on dealing with the situation. Now, what they had envisioned was one of these things that's causing this, because they only heard the one making movements and noise. Now, something they didn't realize at the time was that all that noise and movement up there was actually a distraction from what was going on around them. Now, as the night progressed and they ate, they hung what was left again a little closer on smaller trees that they knew a hairy man wasn't up in already, right? Okay, they used some of the smaller alders and stuff, or the willows, to tie and hang it. They learned their lesson there. When they were camping around, just talking, they were contemplating just leaving and setting up camp the next day closer to their job that they got, which, hey, good idea. Now, as they're discussing this, little pebbles start hitting in the fire. Just little pebbles, just knocking the fire around. So that they were aware of it. They didn't acknowledge it, but they already knew. They had already pre-discussed, whenever it goes down, the main guy will just play it cool until they get close enough, because they were massive. He said the one that stood up and then jumped up the tree was at least 12 foot tall, at least. And they were very concerned about exactly what was going to go down, genuinely. And so as they got their game plan or whatever, and the pebbles are landing, Thomas stands up, and he takes the 4570, and he has it kind of laid up against his side, and he's keeping his body turned in a way from the noise that they had been hearing for the last half hour off in the distance. So he didn't want to see whatever was over there to see that he was armed. He wanted it to be a surprise. And as he's standing up, he's still talking to his partners, but he's fixated away from the fire and away from everything to get his night vision clear, because he had been staring at the fire. So he's getting his night vision clear, just listening. They're talking, he's answering every once in a while, just casual conversation. All of a sudden he gets hit with a little pebble in the back. And he felt like it came square in the back, because the impact was dead on and not a glancing bounce off. So it wasn't coming from the sides, it came directly from the back. And so he mentions in whatever dialect of Yupik they were speaking to one of his partners, "Don't throw rocks, huh?" And his partner said, "Ain't no one throwing rocks." He knew, And so he goes, "Okay." And grant you, they're speaking Yupik. I can't speak Yupik. It's too throaty, too much and whatnot. And I'm not clowning it. I never retained it from when my grandma taught me when I was little. So they're discussing this back and forth in Yupik. That noise he had been hearing, and he's still facing away. He's still getting his night vision, right? This sound goes tearing around, just and making a ruckus on purpose, making a ruckus. And he recognized immediately, distraction. I just got hit in the back with a rock. This thing is distracting us. He turns around just in time to see his friends looking in the direction of the distraction, while a hairy man was grabbing that other deer meat. Now, when he saw that, he immediately turned, whipped, boom, shot it right in the eye, dropped dead, right there. Still holding on to the rope with the deer on it, the deer meat hanging from it. He just collapsed down, crumpled on itself, and the trees lit up with noises and sounds and screams and all sorts of stuff. Branches were being thrown, rocks were being thrown at them, so they're ducking behind trees to get out of view of all this being pelted with rocks and stuff. But they're coming from up in the trees, they're coming from the forest around, and he could determine there was at least another 6 to 7 individuals just from the direction of stuff being thrown, unless, of course, one was throwing over here and just running in a circle, chucking stuff periodically. Other than that, there had to have been at least 6 of them. 7 counting the one that was crumpled up next to their camp. Now, initially he was like, "Oh crap, I just killed this thing. It was just trying to get my food. They were distracting him to take the food. He killed it, and now they got this to deal with." So they pop off some shots into the trees, trying to keep, because the noises were slowly closing in on them. They said, "Screw this." They went around this one side of a tree, and the guy with the 270 was trying to look up, because they got out of the way of the firelight to try to gain better night vision. He had already acclimated himself by turning away from the fire earlier. And so he was trying to keep a bead on the sounds moving and the noises in the trees. Most of the noises in the trees at this point were on the opposite side of the river. There was one noise going on earlier, but he assumed it was the one he shot, because that noise wasn't being made anymore. So they stood their ground. They didn't want to run off into the darkness, because these things had the advantage big time. He said the one he shot was approximately 9 foot tall. As this chaos is going on, slowly the noises started backing away. And when the noises backed away, all of a sudden, bigger rocks start coming in, and they were landing right on that fire. Sounds real similar to some other, like the log throwing incident for poor old, who was that, Jacob? I think that's what I named him. Not his real name, by the way. Anyway, Thomas is actually Thomas's real name. So that starts happening. So they realize, they're trying to knock our fire out, so we really can't see. And they pop shots in that direction periodically. A couple boxes of ammo were missing, so they were very selective on what they were popping at. Now, after a couple volleys of this going on with a couple gunshots, they heard the noises move away, but they felt no sense of safety. None. one of his partners, sorry about that, Alaska, what do you do? Bush plains, you know, they're like mosquitoes. They're gonna be everywhere here real soon. Believe that. Oh, another Piper Cub. Oh, that's a state trooper Piper Cub. Okay, anyway, so what his partner had a little Fox trench shovel from like a surplus, you know, the kind that fold up for GIs or whatever. So he starts digging this grave in a soft spot under the willows, because with all the big tree roots, it was the softest spot he could find. They wanted that body buried. So he starts digging, and he swapped out with the other guy while Thomas stood guard. And through the whole night, they dug down. They were able to get to about 5 feet, maybe, down, big enough for this thing. So they took the rope that basically it collapsed on, tied it around its wrists, and all three of them fought to drag it the 20-25 feet over to this hole. They get to the hole and they dump it in, and when it thumped in there, it still had a little air trapped in its lungs, so it made this kind of sound. It wasn't alive. It was part of its head was blown off when the 45-70 round hit it in the face, and you know, did its thing, did its number on it. And so that noise, he shot into the hole, and so did his other partner. They just put a couple more rounds into it because it made a noise. I get it. This thing was massive. He said it felt to be at least 800 pounds, and the three of them struggled to pull it. You know, they were throwing all sorts of pine needles and other shit underneath it to kind of be kind of break that tension, that friction on the ground. And so they get it buried up, and the whole time he's paying attention to the noises, but there was none. It was dead quiet. Now, as they were plotting to get out of there, it was just starting to get light on the horizon. They were absolutely on pins and needles because these noises started happening again, and it seemed like they were all around, but they couldn't see nothing. They couldn't see nothing. They started hearing that low thump again, but there was no movement sounds associated with that thump. That thump just kept, it was like almost melodic, just ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. And then it caught his eye just right. He said about 45-50 feet away, there was a pair of Douglas firs that kind of had the same base almost, but they were two separate trees. They just grew so close together that they kind of V'd up like that. One of these things was jumping back and forth, thump, 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 and he could tell it was looking right down at them, and it was agitated. It had a very boom, boom, aggressive kind of thing, and he said he couldn't see its face for expressions on that. He said he felt the aggression. He felt the anger and the I'm gonna get you vibes. And so they were seriously on point, and he put a couple shots up at it, and it just scrambled in the trees and was gone. But while they're doing that, there's still all these other noises going on around them. So they're just like, we gotta go. We gotta go now. No one run. Grab our stuff, and let's get to where there's a little more people around, you know. And so they start their slow walk. As they're going, they got an hour, and they're walking slower than normal because they're fucking, you know, scared as shit. Well, as they're going along, they are hearing like they're constantly being circled, and then the circle would turn around, he said, and they were walking slow, so every time they moved, it seemed like every time they stopped and would listen and then start moving again, the circle would go a different direction, always out of sight. Because Grant, you got to remember, it's getting lighter as things are moving on here, and they're able to see better. So these things are smart enough to realize, okay, you know, they killed Bob over there by, you know, stealing the meat. They obviously got something that can, you know, get us. So they're keeping their distance as they're going around. Now, as Thomas and his partners were coming out of the old growth into some of stuff that's already been logged, there was just some replants here and there. So it was a bit open with big stumps. And once they get past this field of big stumps, they go down this little trail, cross another little creek, and then they come into where other people are living, you know, where there's civilization, you know, at the time. as they're going through this stump field, as he calls it, out of the corner of his left eye, he notices one of these things, a smaller one, leaping from stump to stump. And he said the stumps were 25 to 30 feet apart. He said it looked small because these stumps were humongous old growth stumps. If you've never seen one, it's hard. Google it. Old growth Douglas fir stump. Massive bases on these things. He said they average about 10 feet in diameter. And so he saw this thing jumping, and it looked real small in comparison, but in actuality, this thing was actually like 10 foot tall. He didn't realize it, but this thing was going ahead of them. Almost like I'm going to cut them off at the pass. And as soon as it got out of sight ahead of them, in what it thought it was being stealthy and wasn't being seen when he saw it, the noises behind started kicking up in that tree line, and stuff started getting thrown again. So they were trying to set them up. One got ahead of them. They're going to distract them back this way while the other one does its thing. Well, he wasn't going for it. All he told his partners was, move faster, don't look back. Just keep moving. There's one ahead of us. Let's get. So they, hey, you don't have to tell us twice. They're just in the beeline. They're going through, cutting through all this stuff. Now, where they get to where they're anticipating the one being, they hear it scream. It was about 30 feet away in thick cover where they couldn't see it. It screamed, and then back at that tree line, a good distance back now, they heard some more screaming. And then they heard scurrying from that one heading back that direction. So they felt a little more at ease. They didn't come off their guard, but they felt a little more at ease. And they continued on, and they made it to the guy's house they were hired on for. The guy saw the condition they were in. They didn't tell this guy anything. They just said there was weird noises, and we couldn't stay where we were. Something stole our deer meat. We got nothing to eat. The guy was like, look, you guys worked hard for me. This obviously you guys are having too hard of a time on it. Let me just get, I'm going to give you guys a couple bucks, not much, and I'm going to give you a ferry ride over to get you out of here. So they accepted. And I thank God I haven't dealt with them jumping around in trees above me. I don't get around trees that big that often. I've been down to Hinchinbrook Island and down southeast a little ways like Cordova, and they get pretty big, but these were the old growth ones. Excuse me. I could just imagine. I asked him, did it stink? He said, no, you could smell the blood. It just smelled like, iron or whatever. And I was like, well, what about its proportions? And he said, well, when they were putting their hand up on its dead hand, but as they were tying it, they were making comments. And he said his hand barely came up to this mark. His whole hand barely fit right there. And he said that it was unreal in how just robust and obviously strong it was. Just dragging it, he said, was a serious chore. It was some serious dead weight. I'm going to break this up into the 3 parts of this 10-year saga. This is being the first one, and I'll continue on with the other 2. I'll do them back to back to back, and I'll label them as such so they're easier to just follow along. So after this post, the next one will be the part 2 of it, and then after that, the part 3. And that's... trying to imagine keeping my cool to dig a hole. It was just a squirrel, thankfully. Oh, jeez. I thought we were going to get some really good footage here for a second. But thanks for joining me. Anyone wanting to share, AlaskanHairymanProject@gmail.com or nocomp907@gmail.com. And until the next one.